Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to the CE Standards and Recent Development workshop here at the World Resources Forum. A special welcome goes to Mrs. Dr. Miyakio Takenake. She's heading the IEC TC 111, which is dealing with environmental aspects. She is online here. She could not make it here from Japan to Geneva. So I will have her speech and she will be able to respond. I'm here in double function. My name is Xaver Edelmann. I'm the founder and vice president of the World Resources Forum. And here I'm as the chair of IEC TC 59. It's a committee dealing with household apparatus, electrical household apparatus and their performance. I will go into this a little bit later on. I would also like to welcome my co-chair, Sonia Valdivia. She will moderate the whole session and she made the most preparations for it. So thank you very much, Sonia. She had also a lot of other functions since she is also the scientific co-chair of the conference. So thank you, Sonia, for all your preparations. But then I will hand over to you and for going into the speeches. Please, Sonia.
Thank you very much, Xaver. You know him already. We are here 3 days, so you may have seen him in several roles as well. So we will start a session. It's a panel, but it's also an introduction first to our very important ISO standards, the ISO developments that we are having. I would like to start introducing the names of the speakers, but then the speakers will introduce themselves as we agreed. So the first speaker introducing the recent developments from ISO is Monia Corta from ISO, who has prepared an overview on the developments of the standards under the TC 323, that is the Circular Economy Technical Committee, and under which one standard is the standard that my team is convening. And I will also complement what Monia will present with this second standard on 59014 on the sustainability and traceability of secondary materials recovery. So welcome, Monia, and please, the floor is yours. I think at this moment we will use your most updated presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It makes me feel small behind this thing. I hope you're all well, and I hope you had a successful forum so far. I'm very happy to be here. So I will be talking to you a little bit about TC 323, which is the Committee on Circular Economy. Next slide. I have no clicker. Thank you. Fantastic. All right. So for you who in the room don't know about ISO, ISO is an international organization on standardization. As you can see on the slide, I'm just going to move this slightly forward because I can't see. The way we work is that we have ISO members, which are from 167 countries. They take over secretariats and nominate experts for the working groups, for the various working groups, which bring the knowledge of their expertise into the room where committees then discuss rules, regulations, whatever they would like to discuss and put into a standard. The ISO Central Secretariat, that's where I work, which is situated here in Geneva, actually. We help manage the process, make sure that the rules are followed, that the integrity of the process is kept up, and also help our members to facilitate these discussions. So just a little bit of an overview what ISO actually is. We have a very rigorous process, which is consensus-based, which is really important to understand. We have several stages throughout the process. I'll give you a really high-level overview because it's quite complex. But basically, we have certain level, 2 levels of consensus, 1 or 3 levels really of consensus. The first is in a working group level, which is the lowest level of consensus, where the members nominate experts to these working groups, and the working groups discuss as an equal and not representing their country, but representing their expertise. And it's not about voting, it's really consensus building. Then it goes to the TC, which is a country vote of the P members of a committee, and I will talk about that in a second, where the consensus is built on that level, on a TC level. And the third level is the consensus building from all the ISO members, where all the members can vote on a document, just to give you a holistic overview of that. The consensus building process for us is the most important part of the whole process. It's really important that all voices are heard. We are very big in making sure as many countries as possible are involved in the development process. TC323 in particular was founded in 2019, so it's a very young committee. But you will see in the next coming slides, it's become quite big and the interest is huge in this area. The technical scope of the committee, as you can see, is for circular economy to develop framework, guidance, supporting tools, and requirements for the implementation. So this is the overarching scope of the committee. The committee has since grown quite large in number of members, but also in numbers of working groups. At the moment, this is the hierarchy of the committee, just for your general interest. We have the TC, we have a chair advisory group that supports the leadership of the committee to make holistic decisions about strategy, about roadmaps, about issues that touch all the working groups, because as you can understand, with a big committee and lots of working groups and lots of working items, there needs to be some form of coordination happening, which this advisory group basically does. We have a communication task force in this committee, because this committee gets a lot of interest. There's a lot of interest coming from forums such as these, a lot of interest about what's coming, what's going to be next, and we're trying to manage that with this task force. For your information, the secretariat is held by AFNOR, which is in France, and we have created these 5 working groups, and we have a joint working group 14, which Sonja will talk about later. At the moment, this committee has 87 participating members, and you can see those highlighted in the darker color are the participating members, and we have 21 observing members. For those who do not know the difference, participating members actually means they can nominate experts which work then in the working groups. Observing members are only members that can come to the TC meeting, to the plenaries where reports are being made. There are some decisions being taken, but observers, obviously, as the title says, they can only observe, they cannot vote on these matters. So it is really crucial for countries to be participating members rather than observing members. If you want to have your voice heard, you need to be in the room to defend your position and to, bring your point of views to the discussion on the table. But this is a really great committee in terms of making sure as many voices are heard as possible. 78 members on a committee that young is quite unusual, and it's quite amazing to see. And the committee has done a lot of work to make sure especially developing countries are represented, because believe it or not, 2/3 of the ISO members are actually from developing countries. So their voices are really crucial, and we have to make sure they can be part of the journey, especially on an important topic such as circular economy. They probably benefit the most of these standards in the future. So that's why it's so critical for us to make sure their voices are being heard. Additionally to to the members, we also have a liaison function, and I know some from ITU, someone is here from ITU, which actually use this function of being a liaison. Liaisons have different functions, but the idea is for organizations that are not part of a national body, bring their expertise, their perspective from industry or from governmental bodies or any other international organization that cannot partake in the work. So they have some criteria to meet to be able to take part in this way, but they're crucial to make sure the dialogue is open. These interested parties are still informed what's going on in these areas. And in this committee, we have quite a large number of liaisons, as you can see on the screens. I'm not going to go through them. I'm sure you're capable of reading it. But the slides, I'm sure, will be made available afterwards, so you can certainly look at those. Very good. The same is we also have a large amount of numbers of internal liaisons, which we call to other committees, because we want to make sure, because circular economy obviously is a topic that is touching many other areas. It's not singular to one space, so there is a lot of crossover. That's why we have a joint working group to ensure, you know, overlapping scopes are dealt with the appropriate committees, and so we have a large amount of internal liaisons as well. They all provide representatives and report to each other to make sure everyone is informed and knows what's going on in the respective committees as well. Just to go a little bit deeper in terms of the committee structure and the working groups. So the implementation of the 5900 series is dealt with by these main 4 working groups at the moment. And I just put this up to also show the dedication of the committee to ensure developing countries are involved, not just in the development process in terms of bringing expertise to the room and making sure they're actually able to implement these standards, but also in leadership roles. So they have teamed up in many of these working groups to work together, share responsibilities, and bring them to the level of leading these groups in the future themselves, which is obviously very important to us to not just have them in the room, but also to take on some of these leadership roles. This is a snapshot of the timeline of the current program. As you can see, the publication of all standards at the moment under development is planned for 2024 at various times of 2024. The 59,004, 10 and 20 are more likely to be published first, and then 40 and 14 will be coming in the later half of 2024. The ongoing ballots until 17th July obviously have closed for these 3 documents. We have received a huge amount of comments, which is quite common when you have 90 countries involved in the development, plus the other members of the 167 countries that are able to vote at that stage. So this DIS stage is the inquiry stage where all members have access to the document and can provide their point of view. Hence, we have received, I think, for most of these documents over 1,000 comments, which tells you the interest in this topic. And it also tells you how difficult it is to build consensus. Consensus is a very, very difficult thing to achieve with all these competing point of views from different countries. The 5914, the ballot will close in October, so that's fairly soon. And then we will expect both of these standards, the 59,040, which is still in resolving the CD stage comment, which is the committee stage, meaning only the committee members can look at the document at that stage. They will move to the DIS stage, which is again the public stage where every member of the countries can actually look at the document. That will happen soon for this standard in the near future. So we are planning to have the 2024 publications happening. At this point, I would like to remind all of you, this is a first edition of all of these standards. This committee is really new, so they will not get it right the first round. They are working very hard to make sure to have a very good foundation. It's been very difficult to find consensus in even with the principles, with the terms. It's been challenging road, to say the least, but everyone is in good spirits and everyone is really dedicated to make sure these documents are valuable once they are being published. However, you never get it right the first time. So they are already working on a roadmap, or have already worked on a roadmap to continuously improve the documents in the future. So even if things are not quite right, and sometimes this is only obvious once a document is being used, because as you can understand, you get down rabbit holes in these discussions, you overthink, and you probably provide too much or too little information for things you haven't thought of in these discussions. So this is a first version of these standards. So there will be many more in the future, I'm sure, and there will be new standards and new directions coming from the committee as well. If you have any questions, technical questions about the documents itself, it's best to get in contact with Catherine. She's the chair of the committee. She is a very knowledgeable and very happy to provide information, and she's very happy to have a chat, come to forums. If you have interest about the committee, what is happening, she's always up for being invited and presenting the committee and help to promote the committee's work as well. Any question around secretariat, so how to join the committee, who to talk to, you can get in touch with Melissa. And if you have any general questions about the processes on ISO in general, you can contact myself. My email address is also on the slide, which is quarter@iso. This was it from me in terms of ISO. You're welcome.
And a special thanks, because I know the whole TC323 is meeting this week in Sweden. And you made a space in your slot. Probably you will be online attending these meetings, but now you made it here. Thank you very much. And that was also a bit of a clash we cannot avoid these days with so many meetings going on, but you see the hard work. Now they are all meeting 1 week there so that they finalize the comments on I say they because I'm also, I could not join these meetings. So with this, maybe we zoom in a bit. And this is what I would like to present, one of the standards that we are developing jointly with some of you. And as Monia presented, the 59014 standard is convened by 2 countries. One is Switzerland and the other one is Mauritius. And or probably Bertie, my co-convener, is attending online also the other sessions in Sweden. And this standard is about environmental management and circular economy as an overarching title, but more specifically about the scope is sustainability and traceability of secondary materials recovery, and what it contains is principles and requirements. And the number 59014, I get the question sometimes, why is it the number like this? 59 comes from the series of 59,000, that is the TC323 Circular Economy Technical Committee, and 14 is from the Environmental Management Committee, Technical Committee, the 14,000 series. Yeah, just in case you never knew, you didn't know, but now you know. 59. This is really a very special case in the sense that it's under 2 parenting committees. It's not just one, it's 2. And also, if you have heard about the challenges of reaching consensus within 1 technical committee, can you imagine among 2 technical committees? So this is very nice at the end, because you realize that what you reach is having a broader platform, broader discussion, and enriching a standard that would be the result at the end of the day. So with this, I would like to move to the next with this, I guess. Exactly that. I will not repeat this figure, but it's always important to see where we are in this landscape. But I know there are new developments, so probably in future we'll need to update this figure with other standards that are being emerging, being finalized. What I would like to highlight here is the connection with the technical committee TC207 on environmental management standards, because we also had to do this exercise, how we are linking the 59014 with the other standards on environmental management. And we are mentioning them in the 59014, for example, the standards such as 14,040 and 14,044 that relate to life cycle assessment, because TC207 SC5 is a very precise subcommittee that is parenting us its own life cycle assessment. We also mentioned in the standard ISO 14046 on water footprint, or 67 on carbon footprint, obviously 14050 on the glossary for the full 14,000 series standards, among others. So this is also a very interesting mapping of linkages. Also, what I would like to highlight is what took us a long way to get is we had initially 15 principles, I think 17. And we heard from all parts, please reduce, please mainstream, because this is not manageable. Organizations that want to implement standard will never manage to do this. So, and that was very good, a very good exercise, and we managed to get to the end, the 8. And as you see, the first one on the top relate more to socioeconomic aspects, talking about respect for interested parties' interest, value chain responsibility. A very new one, maybe to many of you, would be the one on responsibility towards subsistence activities. And by the way, this is a key term, subsistence activities, that we have agreed that we need and that we define in reaching consensus. We succeeded on that. And it's an important part of the scope of this standard, how to address the issues of subsistence activities. Then the safe, healthy, and equitable working conditions. These are the more socioeconomic aspects. And the ones down you see are more related to the environment, protection of the environment, but also resource conservation. Maybe this is one related more to circular economy. And I think, by the way, the text is taken up from the 5904. Then obviously the life cycle perspective and the very clear linkage with the circular economy series of standards, enabling of circular resource flow using secondary materials. So these are our principles. Just a snapshot of the table of content, but mainly on the requirements part. 3 clauses relate to the requirements, the 6, 7, and 8. The 6 is about the operational requirements, the 7 is about management and organizational requirements, and the 8 about traceability requirements. The standard is about traceability. Perhaps also to some of new, the traceability part is kind of new. At many points we were said, well, you have to link with a chain of custody standard of ISO that already exists. No, because we are not going at that level of detail. But eventually organizations will implement the traceability based on this standard. So we remain at a higher level. This is on the table of content and all what that this standard contains. And here, so to finalize, how we develop what has been very much appreciated by the participants and even recommended to become upfront, mandatory, and I will explain you that it's not mandatory, it's recommended. It's about the recovery pathway methodology. This is in an annex, and this is proposed to be used in case the organization doesn't have a recovery pathway methodology, or it's in a country, in a context, in a location, or the regulation is not proposing any, so then there is a need for developing one. They can use this recovery pathway methodology. More or less what it says. Susan, this is a summary. It's not the long version because otherwise it... Okay, this is where we start very importantly with collection and sorting. And this is the first important steps that we recommend to be taken into account. These are up here in the Zoom. Wow, I didn't know. Here you collect the recoverable resources, which then are sorted, and then based on some testing, decided what the next pathway is. A very important and interesting point. In the document, you don't read waste. I think only twice you read the term waste because it's about changing mindsets. And we said we had hard time with that at the beginning. We were always saying waste. No, sorry, recoverable resources, because this was a clear agreement also coming from TC323. We needed to harmonize the language, but also to be consistent and try to explain that everything can be recovered. There is a possibility for them to recover. Of course, this is, we can argue, we can discuss later, but you find rarely the term waste in the standard. So after that, the priorities, the hierarchy priority one, what I would call, is obviously to recover these recoverable resources as products or components. But then if it's not possible because it was not properly collected, it's already broken, etc., then you go to the recoverable resources form as material. That means there is a process that needs to take place. Obviously, the processes are not described here because it would be too much. And there, even then, there are two options where there is a hierarchy, sub-hierarchy. That means recovering materials with the same properties is better than downgrading the materials. This is the kind of hierarchy that we are proposing. And with this, there is the example of the plastics that are collected in our daily lives. And then there is the possibility, perhaps for some types of bottles, to be recovered as a product because they are so nice, they are of good material. You can still reuse them as flower pots or as other things. Or you just deliver them to the pathway because the city is able to promote the recycling again as bottles. And this is the best case. But then if you cannot do that, you can also find hazardous waste there or contaminated bottles. So they have to exit immediately the system. But what remains that cannot be recycled as product or component, in that case product, then goes for the recovery of materials, which in that case mean a downgrading, but at least materials, because then you have granulates of PET, for example. This is just an example. And with this, I finalize confirming a bit the timeline that Monia explained. We are very excited because we are going into the next ISO stage, the way you call it, because we are now in the DIS phase. That means we will wait a bit for the last round of comments and we will meet probably next year and finalize the revision. Yes. Sorry, can you help me?
You have foreseen question after my presentation.
Yes, we have another panelist and then, yes. Yes.
Thank you very much, Sonia, and big applause for its presentation. You know, this is a project supported by the Swiss government with SHRI project, Sustainable Recycling Industries. And Sonia is leading this project. Thank you, Sonia, for this insight. Now we are seeing the business perspective, and I'm very happy to call on the floor Els Duchesne from Janssen Pharmaceuticals. Please.
Hello and good afternoon. And I will do something special. I don't have slides, so you'll have to listen. So nice to meet you. Glad you're all here. This is perhaps a bit of a strange industry perspective coming from the pharmaceutical sector. Probably not what you're used to hearing around here, unless you participated to some of our workshops on dyes, and then you would know. So I'm here in two capacities. First of all, representing Janssen and by default J&J, because Janssen is part of Johnson & Johnson, but also as coordinator of digital health in a circular economy, where we try to embrace the principles of circular economy in the healthcare sector, which due to the many regulations we have is not the easiest one to drive circularity forward. But nevertheless, we do have a couple of opportunities that we see and that we really want to pursue. Now, what is important to know is that healthcare sector as such does have a huge contribution to GHG emissions. It is estimated between 2 to 5, depending on the scenarios. Let's say 5. So if you would compare that to a country, it would be the fifth biggest emitter worldwide. So that's saying something. So that means that we as a healthcare sector have to do something now, and we have to take out the responsibility for that. Within J&J, we take that quite seriously. We have a credo that has been in place since the founding of the company, and these are 4 paragraphs. Patient always comes first for us, that's clear. But then if we move to the 3rd paragraph, the second being the communities that are around the patients. If we go to the 3rd paragraph, there we take up the responsibility also for the environment. Why? Because we do see an immediate link between environmental health and human health. You cannot have one without the other. And if we want to go to more preventive medicine, then investing in environmental health is key for that. So that's sort of the context of where we are. And it's not just J&J that is moving along this pathway. We see that across the industry as well. Actually, this morning, I was part of a conversation with the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations, where we are planning an update on our white paper on circular economy. We have a white paper out that is available publicly. We are now updating it. So you can already have a look at the old version. It's available online, but be aware, we'll have a better one coming up soon. And that group that is leading it is the Circular Economy Expert Network Group of FBA. So in practice, what does it mean for us to drive circular economy? Well, I was very glad to see in Monia's presentation the sort of 3 top pillars that were mentioned there, life cycle thinking being the most important one to determine priorities. If we do pharmaceutical manufacturing, the key thing that is driving the footprint is the manufacturing itself. It's not the use phase, it's not the transportation, it's certainly not the packaging. That's perception, perhaps, but it is the manufacturing as such. So if we look at hotspots through LCAs, which we have done both for the pharmaceutical sector and for the medical device sector, we determine our priorities. I'll give a brief example for pharmaceutical sector. When we do your average drug product, you have to synthesize it. We need a lot of solvents to do that, either for the manufacturing itself or for cleaning. I don't have to tell you that solvents have a big footprint. So our main priority is within our processes to make sure that we can do solvent recovery. And incidentally, when I was part of the session this morning on electronics and sustainability, although it's completely off topic for me, I saw the battery recycling and recovery of solvents during the processing. That sort of came home to me because it was a completely different area, but similar problems. So one of the things that we're trying to do is indeed in the processes that we drive, recover solvents as we move along, and then recycle them back into the process. So without leaving the walls of the company, let's say. That is not as easy as you might think. We do have very strict quality controls. So convincing our quality colleagues that it's worthwhile pursuing is not the easiest discussion, but we managed. The same thing holds for catalysts, for example, and that is even more relevant to the audience here. Palladium, which is a HIC component, is needed for some of our processes. So we have developed what we call plant on a truck, where we can recover the palladium from our processes, clean it and reuse it again. And we have multiple examples like that. So this is sort of, who said it? Sustainability by stealth, they call it, because it's not immediately visible to the people who are using the products or are administering the products, but it's behind the scene and it's really driving circular economy in a sort of hidden way. More on the upfront, or what is more visible, is also what the industry and J&J is trying to improve in take-back schemes from our patients. So I hope you will never need it, but if you perhaps have a chronic disease where you need monthly injections or 3 monthly injections, you will be faced with a lot of material in your home. It's not the nicest thing to have in your house, really. And depending on the member states, you have different ways of collecting. In the worst case scenario, people still put it in the waste bin and it goes for incineration. I think we can do better. So one of the examples that we have rolled out within J&J is a program called Safe Returns, where the patients can send back their devices to us, where we are now collecting them in a hub and where we have the intention And we're actually trying to build this assembly machine right now as we speak here in Switzerland, to take them back and have an automatic disassembly of the devices. So at least we can recover some components. We can't recover the needle. I think that speaks for itself. But other components we can bring back and close the loop. One other thing that was really striking me in your presentation was the focus on traceability. I think for us that's even more important. When we want to drive, for example, the use of recycled content and plastic components that we need, we cannot use your average post-consumer recyclates. There's too much variability in quality of that. So we can't just go up the market and source that from there mechanically. Let's not discuss chemical recycled content right now. But if we want to drive that forward, we will have to know where those components came from. So we'll have to have a very tight, closed loop and have that traceability and certainty that we can guarantee the quality all across, because the regulatory bodies will never accept changes in that quality profile. So that's, I think, is very, very clear. The traceability is also relevant for another point, and that's counterfeiting. We don't want our packaging or devices to be leaking out of the system and then somebody else misusing them in any other way. So I think that's also a very relevant point that we have to be aware of. The last point that I also saw in your presentation, or the second point really, was resource efficiency. I think the solvent recovery spoke to that, because that's an immediate consequence. And the last point was collaboration. I think that's crucial. We cannot do this as a single company in any way. We can drive our own processes, but even then, some solvent mixes are too difficult for us to separate internally. And then we work with a sort of distillery as a service sort of idea, where a specialized company comes on our sites and will do the processing for us. They have the specialized technology to do that. But it is also along the value chain. And I think the project where Sonia is also involved is called Digital Health in a Circular Economy, shows that. If we want to drive circularity, we have to think holistically from design, and usually we don't design our own devices, we source them from somewhere else, from the design point all the way back along the circle. And it was interesting, yesterday we did a brainstorming on business modeling and how we can drive that forward. And I was writing down on a note and talking about up and downstream supply. Well, if you think about circular economy, we should get rid of that word. In the same way, we should get rid of the word waste. There's no longer up and downstream in a circular economy. So that for me was a sort of aha moment when I thought about it a little bit deeper. On that collaboration, we now have, I think, a cross-section across the entire value chain represented in a consortium. It will be key for all the people that are sort of representing their sector to see that added value of working in this new way and having business models that are strong enough for all the partners to participate in. I think that will be one of the challenges we still have to face and still have to deal with, not only in the consortium, but also elsewhere. So I think with that, I've sort of walked you through some of the opportunities we see as a sector, where we also see the value of standardization, especially also in the measuring and reporting. I think that's going to be crucial. There's a lot of reporting that needs to be done in the future, not only on climate, but also on circularity. And using standards will help us to be able to do that in a standardized way, so that you're comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges. So I also think there that having those standards and harmonization will help us going forward. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Alice, from the business side. Now we are open for questions to the three speakers, please, Monia and Sonia. And Susan has the first question. Please, Susan.
Thank you so much. My name is Suzanne Karcha, co-founder African Circular Economy Network. Sonia dragged me into the joint working group 14, so this is how my first experience started. And in the meantime, I was very happy to hear that South Africa started the technical committee, right, on 323, and ASEAN is actually part of the experts in that team. And we have recently provided comments also to ISO 323 shared some of the concerns that we heard from others, that there is too much industry bias. So my question is, number one, is there a quota regarding global south countries in terms of participating? And secondly, is there a distinction made in terms of what type of stakeholders? Because the sense that I get is that this is very dominated by industry, that there's hardly any NPOs or representatives of indigenous communities. So what are you going to do, or is this already addressed to really have a more equitable kind of contribution possibility?
Yeah, so this is so how it works in general. The member bodies, the countries decide and are responsible for sourcing the experts. So they create a mirror committee like South Africa has finally done. But there are many, many countries that don't really have an industry, they don't have the expertise, they don't have a mirror committee to populate a mirror committee with the expertise that is missing. And usually the most parties that will approach a national body to create such a mirror committee is the interest with a vested interest. It's the industry with vested interest, because they benefit the most of sitting on the table and being heard. So, of course, in a perfect world, we had balanced mirror committees, which then discuss on a national level their interests and find consensus, balancing out that it is not, that there isn't a bias from any part of the industry, right? In reality, that's of course much more difficult to do than it is on the paper. However, we do strive to work with national bodies to make sure the stakeholders they engage is not one-sided, that they are bringing everyone on the table, especially also in many areas, the consumer is being not considered at all, because consumer representatives are hard to find. They often don't have funding. They're very difficult to source and to send to meetings, which happening are all over the world. The world has changed because of COVID, so it's easier to get them on board because they can participate actively online, which has always been the case, by the way. ISO always promoted the use of online participation, but it was never really accepted that much. COVID has actually changed that in a positive way. So there has been some good things with COVID. Not all have been, but that was one of the good changes, I think. But yeah, it's a very challenging thing. We also see a problem, this happening obviously in developing countries more than in other countries, because they have very specific interests, and also again funding, creating these committees costs money. The projects have to be run by someone and they have to be paid for. So there's a lot of challenges. ISO does try to provide support to help identify these issues, address especially imbalances with more engagement of stakeholders, and we try to support especially developing countries to find tools for that.
And could ASIN play a role with this? I mean, we have, as a non-profit, we are the voice, or we start to form the voice of Africa in the circular economy debate of what Africa needs out as an agenda. What can ASIN really do? Because we think we would like to provide hands-on support to motivate other countries to form those mirror committees, because that seems to be the bottleneck, right?
It is the bottleneck in many ways. So I think the best thing to do is probably work with SAPS first, because they're the member bodies of South Africa. They can also come to ISO, because we obviously the contact point for all the member bodies. And something that is really nice is normally developing countries are very happy to take on any support and use any provided support. So if there is someone providing help with how to set up a proper mirror committee, or how to engage the government, or have these policy discussions, they are happily to take that advice on and use it and try to implement it as far as they can. So maybe contacting SAPS and then going through ISO with the capacity building unit, which is dedicated to the developing country side, which is probably more of interest to you, might be the right step. But it's not my department, so maybe we can just email and I can put you in touch with the right person, and then we can go from there and see if they are the right point. Yeah.
Thank you
so much. Or the
DevCo
committee would also be good.
Thank you.
Paul, over there.
Yeah, thanks very much. Monia. It's very interesting, and your colleagues. Just talk me through how this works. And the previous session I was in was a session about Ghana and recycling lead and getting secondary materials from lead acid batteries. And there seemed to be three parties involved in that. There were the people who were actually doing the recycling, very often in a very polluting way. And so that was very problematic. The Environmental Protection Agency of Ghana, which then came in and inspected these guys and sometimes shut them down. And then most of the recyclates were going to the battery industry in Germany. And so we had someone from the German industry body there talking about that. And one of these ISO standards is on secondary materials, as I noticed. Just talk me through how, in that context, which is clearly very less than ideal, who is going to do what? I mean, who's going to apply this ISO standard at some point, and how is this actually going to change what happens on the ground?
So I mean, I can't talk about the technical content, obviously, but maybe Sonia can answer that question in more detail.
Thank you. So maybe because it's a bit detailed, and indeed this was the motivation to try to answer that question, Paul. How can we include or work with the 80% of the people in the world that are in that part of the value chain, collecting, dismantling? We're talking about the world as an average. And this is what we call initially inclusive recycling. Now through the standard, what we develop is principles and also actions requirements for subsistence activities. Now, we are not talking about illegal activities. If you talk about batteries, for example, battery recycling, which become a huge business, and then we are seeing people evading the authorities, etc. This is illegal. But if we're talking about subsistence activities, there's a large portion of individuals or groups of them that collect and are under some legislations also within the requirement. I mean, they are complying with the requirements. And in Ghana, there is an example. So we have here actors from Ghana, and there are guidelines that have developed a framework that allows these individuals to work formally as subsisting activities and contributing to the recycling. So I think we have to differentiate. We can talk case by case, but this is possible, and this is in our standard. What we wanted to address.
But would one expect the German importing organizations to apply the standard and to be, looking at and doing all the traceability, because clearly they have more resources? Or is it the EPA in Ghana? I'm talking about legal guys, obviously. Yeah. I'm talking about, and these are industries in Ghana. I mean, they're not just odd people who walk around picking up batteries. These are industries and recyclers, or are these the people who will apply the standard?
It's the organization, any organization that is conducting activities or processes to recover secondary materials. It can be collection, it can be dismantling, non-destructive, destructive processes. Any of them can apply this. But of course, the driver could come from somewhere else. That's correct, but anybody. So that is possible also for Ghanaian organizations.
To add to that, the general challenge with standards is they're voluntary. Unless they're written into legislation or policymakers have picked up on them, it's hard to enforce them. So contractual, to put them in contract to make them required by anywhere in the supply chain is the easiest way to ensure these standards are actually being used. But for that to happen, people need to know about the standards. They need to understand them, that they're useful, and they need to have the support from government and policymakers to actually promote these standards. I mean, the committee alone cannot do that for 167 countries. So that's why, especially in this committee, the chair is very dedicated to go to many forums. We have been to the OECD, we have been to many other forums where we have spoken about the importance of these standards and what they will bring to these countries to deal with these, especially with these. I mean, we can't stop illegal activities. The standard will not solve these problems, and that's not what the standards are meant to do. But unless they are being used and applied, and they're easily available, it's not going to change that. So it has to come from all sides. It's not just writing the standard and that will change the world.
Yeah.
No, there has to be driving coming from the countries themselves. So the NSB, so the national standardization bodies, have to do promotional work to make sure the industry is aware. And that's why we really want national bodies to ensure they have a very balanced mirror committee to have the national conversation, because they also will spread the word within the industry. So there's many different steps before we have that happening.
I would like to ask some to else before she leaves. She has to take the airplane, and it's about the industry participation in the standardization, because it's very relevant. I just noted the last comments you provided on traceability, on reporting. What would be the motivation? How could we get closer with potential participants in ISO processes to get your feedback? What is your view?
Yeah, I think the best to do that, and actually I raised it also this morning talking to the FPA group, is to go through the trade associations, because then you have the biggest catchment all at once, and also the right people to review the content, let's say, because then you would have the SMEs. And one thing I also noted in your presentation was health safety. Actually, this FPA Circular Economy Network Group is part of the ESG expert group under FPA, so environmental health and safety. So it's the close match, let's say, with what you have highlighted. So I would go through that official channel, and that will be the biggest chance of getting inputs, I would say.
Okay. Further question here?
Just to see, maybe I missed it and it is patently obvious, but is there like model agreements where you've kind of clarified how to integrate ISO standards into contractual agreements? And I suppose, would it be helpful for J&J to have that kind of model agreement to base negotiations off? Yeah, so 2 questions, I guess.
Maybe I can start on the last part. Definitely. And just to give an example, under current environmental legislation, there is already a duty to communicate the presence of a substance of very high concern down the supply chain. And I don't know if you're ever involved in that kind of work, but I tell you, it's a nightmare. It's a duty, but just getting that in the complex supply chains we have is near impossible. And I've been doing this program for 4 years now. And what made the difference was through FPA, have a standardized template that all the partners in or all the members support and go to their suppliers. Because otherwise what you see is supplier A gets a template request from us, and then from another company different, and then another one different, and they just give up. So having a standardized way and having that baked in, that is the way we communicate in the supply chain is key. Because, I mean, if you're on the supplier side, I would go crazy if I have to do the same thing in 20 different templates too. I would give up as well. So having that standardized is probably key to success, definitely.
I would like to give an answer also to Paul to his question. Of course, there is, from the European side, we have the European directives and standards are used for implementation. In a developing country, it can be the opposite, that you use standards as basis for regulation. And of course, it's then the question, how strong is the environmental agency? And then with the import or export to Germany, of course, also the importer in Germany will have the responsibility, or also the exporter, that he follows the laws, and maybe the laws both in the country and in their own country. Okay, but if there are one other question, then I would propose that we make the short input from ITU, and I will give a short input from IC, and then we go to the general questions without having the podium discussion, since we are quite ahead in time.
Thanks. Thank you, Sarah. And Elsie is leaving, so many thanks and an applause.
Thank you very
for
much.
Elsie. Yes.
Okay, then it's a great pleasure for me that we also see one standardization institutions, ITU. It is different from ISO, it's different from IEC, but we will hear more about it from Reina Ubeda. Please, Reina.
Thank you. Thank you so much also for inviting us and inviting ITU to this event. My name is Reina Ubeda. I just work across the street, so it was not so long coming here, as some of you have traveled, I guess, a lot of kilometers. I am originally from Nicaragua. I work as project officer for ITU. ITU has 3 sectors. Just to where is the? I cannot see it. But it's. I lost the clicker.
The point.
The pointer. Clicker. I think I saw them.
Yeah.
There after, there we are. So ITU, for those that don't know ITU is the specialized agency for ICTs and digital technologies of the United Nations. And we are also a standard development organization recognized by WTO, the same as is ISO or IC. In ITU, there are 3 sectors. One sector is the radio communication sector, the development sector, and the standardization sector, is where I work for. The work of ITU, it's developed in study groups, and study groups are like working groups. And I know that for some people that they don't know the terminology of ITU, you get a bit lost. So each study group is dedicated to a specific topic. Study group 5, which I provide the secretariat, is on environment, climate change, circular economy, EMF, sustainable digitalization. So it's a very long name. I told experts when they decided the name, like, do you want to put something else in the site? Because it's very difficult to remember. So what we are focusing is on electromagnetic compatibility, resistibility, and lining and protection, soft errors caused by particle radiation, human exposure to electromagnetic fields, the part on the assessment of the EMF, circular economy and e-waste management, ICTs related to the environment, energy efficiency, clean energy, and sustainable digitalization for climate action. So that's the work that we develop, and we develop this work within questions. Questions are like subgroups. And the members of ITU comprise 193 member states, over 700 industry members from manufacturers, vendors. Also, we have regulators. We have the Academy and Research Institute, and also the UN agencies and other regional organizations are part of the ITU work. I was asked to provide you a very short presentation, so I will be short. Some of our key recommendations on circular economy, we have on the part on reduction, for example, the universal charger. We have work on the L1000 series, that is the universal adapter for mobile phones, for laptops, also for stationary devices. And right now we are working on, and it was a proposal from African countries, on a universal charger for smart band and smart watches. Some other standards are also the part on the circular economy or circular design, which is the assessing the circularity of a product. Of ICT goods. We work focus on ICT goods, because I know that other ISO work more general also in other products, but we work more in the part on electronics. Then another key work that we do is the part on e-waste, on EPR, standards, also the standards on the sustainable management of e-waste. I don't have a slide on that, but for example, something that Maya, Moya, Maya said, sorry, was that once the standards are done, sometimes they are not perfect. And sometimes they need revision and they need also to be implemented. So one of the standards that we did that implementation was on e-waste management in Costa Rica and Argentina, that it was also based on the EMPA guidelines and the development of an inventory. So this standard, after it was implemented in Costa Rica, a case study is also available in our website, how this implementation went. We received some feedback to revise the standards. So the standards are revised based on the input received from the members once they are implemented or based on new development. Some of the work that we are doing is the requirements for a global digital sustainable product passport to achieve a circular economy related to the ICT sector. We are working this in collaboration with ETSI. ETSI is an European standard organization. And what we do with ETSI, we develop technically aligned standards. The content is the same, just the cover page will change. But what we do is that since the beginning, we work together. We have joint meetings where experts meet. They have their own constituency and then they meet and work on the standard. This standard will have requirements for reporting the key aspect related to circularity and transparency for ICT, facilitate and automate comparison and different ICT based on circularity aspects, also will help the recyclers. And we hear that there is a lot of expectation on the digital product passport, and this has been driven also by the European Commission. The European Commission is also a member that can participate in ITU work, but what we also want as an international organization is that the discussion is not just based on at the European level. Maybe you also were when on Monday when our Deputy Secretary General presented some of our work, and this was one of the questions. How can other regions be involved? And right now we are discussing with other UN agencies, for example, the UN Environment, how to also bring the perspective from the Ministry of Environments in the discussion. Because we have the membership of the Ministry of ICTs, but sometimes the environmental view is missing. So we are discussing with the UN Environment to have a more strengthened collaboration to have these two ministries working together. So we are also discussing with other entities like WBCSD, the Circular Electronic Partnerships, and this is something that you have mentioned before, is that collaboration is key. One of our key collaborators, I get confused where I need to click. Apart from ETSI, is also the Basel Convention. With the Basel Convention, we work very closely, and we are very happy that we have representatives from the Basel Convention work in our subgroups working with us. And thank you, Francesca. I see that you are there. Just to bring you a bit of an information from the Basel Convention, but Francesca is there, so she can answer a bit more in depth. There will be some amendments on the e-waste from the 1st of January 2025. The procedure would apply to all e-waste moved transboundary, and the new e-waste codes could be recorded in the digital product passport. Francesca explained me, because she knows it very well, that this before an assessment was needed to decide if the e-waste was under the Basel Convention or not. And it was not possible to include the Basel codes in the DPP. And with the new changes, this will be possible. But if you have more questions, please ask Francesca. Francesca, did I say it right? Good. And also ITU cooperate with the Partnership for Action on Challenges Related to E-Waste, that is phase 2, and to develop an ESN guidance. Also based on Basel and the ITU standards. Now, we said we collaborate across UN agencies, we collaborate with other STOs. As Morja mentioned, we have a liaison with ISO, IEC, also collaborate with other entities like JESI, and several organizations like STEP that you know, with the WRF as well. So there is a strong collaboration, because we believe that it's important to get together. For example, in the part on e-waste, there is the e-waste coalition, that is a coalition of the UN agencies, to avoid duplication, to avoid market fragmentation, and also because their e-waste and circular economy and transsectoral topics. So it's good that we have the voice of the different entities. We also have in study group 5 a regional perspective. We have regional groups that are based, one in Africa, Arab region, Asian, the Pacific, and Latin America. And the benefit of the regional groups is that when they meet, they can speak in their own language, they can discuss their own priorities, and bring it to the study group, to the Bayer study group. One of the challenges that we have had, for example, in the Digital Product Passport, is how to bring the perspective from other regions, from Africa, from Latin America, that we see there is a lack of participation at the international level in the standards development. They do participate, they do have their national standardization bodies, but it's important to bring it to the international level. So this is from me. Thank you so much for allowing me the time to present a bit the work that we do.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rena. One question.
Yes.
It's always important. What is the cost of the document? What about the cost of the ITU documents?
They are free of charge. They are free of charge.
I think that's an important message. I don't know, IEC and ISO doesn't like this, but it's a fact.
They are free of charge, and if members, they are all available on the ITU website once the document is published and after the editing time. And if our member, by a member request, it can be translated in one of the 6 official languages of the UN, that are English, Russian, Chinese, Arabic, French, and Spanish.
Thank you very much. We will have later on again to pose questions. Thank you, Rena. Then I will give you, to make it a little bit more complicated, also the view of IEC. Can I have the slide? I'm doing this on behalf of Mrs. Dr. Miyuki Takaneka, and as I said, she is online. And there is, on IEC, there are 2 advisory groups on this topic. One advisory group is for energy efficiency. I'm a member there. There is another advisory group on environmental aspects. And there is a special committee, TC111, and this committee deals also with circular economy standards, and I will show you this presentation prepared by my Japanese colleague. Next slide. You see the name is Environmental Standardization for Electrical and Electronic Products and Systems, and this was established in 2004. 80 members, you have heard from before from ISO what it means, P members and 10 observers. Nigeria was the latest P member. It is guided by the chair, this Miyuki Takenaka from Japan, and as a secretary, Alonso Sturico from Italy, and also assistant secretaries also from Italy. 232 experts from 22 economists with over 400 participants in the working groups. There are liaisons with 6 ISO organization committees, with 23 other theses of the IEC and 2 organizations, ECMA and ECOS. There are 27 publications and 15 active groups. So next slide. The standardization of environmental aspects, they prepare guidelines, basic and horizontal standards, including technical reports. It has not only standards, also technical reports, but that's the same also for ISO. The cooperation with the product committees, as for example, my committee TC59, to ensure consistency in these standards. And they will monitor regional standardization, regulatory activities to become a focal point for discussion in this area. And then these environmental issues in this committee, chemical substances, we have heard before also the need for this kind of thing, circular economy, including waste management. We should not talk anymore from waste. Environmentally conscious design, life cycle evaluation, and greenhouse gas emissions, an important point, and environmental performance assessment of products. There are 3 stages: make, use, return, things which return sustainable e-waste management is in committee draft. Guidelines for end-of-life information is a working document. Then going up the line, use, the committee draft version, product category rules, carbon footprint calculation, and then in make, material circularity consideration, reuse components, and materials declaration. These are also all ongoing work. You can get more information on the work of IEC in this area on the webpage, both from IEC, but also from this committee as it is mentioned now. And I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm free of answering questions together with Reina. And then I will hand over afterwards to Sonia. Are there any questions with regard to ITU or IEC? Of course, in IEC, there is a lot of industry in. That's very much industry dominated. Yes, please.
My name is David from Ghana. My question is for the ITU. I'm not an expert in electronic equipment, so pardon me for my ignorance. But I suspect that all equipment tend to degrade over time. And one of the top hierarchy of the circular economy, or the pyramid, is that equipment should be reused or even repurposed wherever possible. Do you have standards for electronic equipment that can or should be reused? And if not, do you plan on certain standard for this? Thank you.
Not yet, but we are contribution-driven organization. So if a member state submit this contribution to develop this standard, it can of course be developed.
Huh.
Good.
Okay, very good. So you will make a formal question with regard to ITU and also from Ghana. I think I would recommend that you write ITU.
Where that we only look at the collection rates and recycling rates, and then producers try to meet the recycling quotas, and then perfectly functional equipment is actually going to recycling. So we need to break that and actually come up with some standards that we could incorporate to get the hierarchy right. You want to say something?
That's a good point. Just before, because my brain was thinking, and then I say no, and then there is something that is been a bit related is a work item on collection treatment of electronics, and it was a proposal from Africa. But this could be something that you could also participate in the discussions. We can see how your organization can work in ITU, because we are member driven, but there are also some exception for some organizations to work. It can be also through a country that it can be the proposal. Yeah.
Good.
Sorry.
Okay.
I-
Yeah.
Just to kind of piggyback on this discussion, because that's a brilliant question. We don't go to the top of the hierarchy ever, which is reduce. We just don't even talk about it. It's like, how do we reduce our consumption? Well, we do, well, at least at this forum, we do. But
Yeah.
how do we create standards that address that? Oh, it's such a challenging, confusing question to me. So I don't know what your opinion
for
is
example,
there.
in reduced consumption, there was a standard. Sorry. Okay, in consumption, for example, there was a standard more related to circular public procurement, how to guide public sector to buy more circular products. That this will also lead to that. And also in the part on reduction, you have the universal power adapter that it could also be related. Yeah.
Another question? Yes. Yeah.
I find this really interesting with the unified adapters that you were talking about, with the standardization of this. And I mean, we had this partly in the EU, I think, already with two kinds of iPhone and Android phones, and then we have USB-C right now also. How can you make sure, or can you even make sure that the standards influence policy making at some point? And what is
Well-
done on that regard?
Yeah. She laughed because she knows that it's difficult. There is the part the regulators participate in the standard development. As Maria say, if they put it in the legislation, then it will become mandatory because there are voluntary standards. Well, I don't know if I will answer your question, but I will try to round it about it. But for example, the European Commission now, it has making this law to have an universal charger. I don't remember, it was by 2025 or 2030. It will be soon that there is a, I'm sorry, I don't have the date, but they will implement the universal charger in Europe. So there should be I guess all companies. Sorry? 27. So it was in between 25 and 2030. So 27, there is part of the legislation, but it takes time because this standard was developed in 2014. It was revised then in 2008, 2020, if I'm not mistaken, to add the part on the USB-C. But it takes, it's not that fast. Sometimes it takes all the negotiations, the different stakeholders. So yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. The challenge with policymakers is awareness. That's really the biggest challenge. They're often not aware that standards in a specific area exist, or they need to be convinced in a way that they are helping with their policy making. So in Africa, we were in Africa last year with the TC323 committee, and we had a big side event with actually French policymakers from the African region, which is the kind of event you need to do, or promotion you need to do, to ensure they are aware, they see the benefits of it. And only once that happens, you will have an universal, like with the charger. I mean, in the EU, it's much easier because everyone that is in the EU will implement it. They're required to do so. There's other countries that don't have these kind of implementations happening because they're all individuals. So there is a lot of extra work. That's why it takes so long for these things to happen. So, yeah, and it is up to the countries to promote these documents and have these events happening with the policymakers.
I agree. I always tell people, you know what? It's because standards are not sexy. Because people think of standards and they don't think what they are used to. But all the things that we use, they have standard behind. So this is important, and as Maria said, that the regulators see standards as a policy tool. Yeah.
Are there any further questions? Maybe also towards you remain here, and Sonia comes forward. I have a question to you, Monia. We have been talking about the complexity of standards, and I'm looking now from the aspect of small and medium enterprises and looking into the, I think it's a 5920, which has 85 pages, full with information. How is it possible to break this down, that it is real executed, applied? I know it's a difficult question.
It is a difficult question. So the challenge is, if you're very passionate about a topic and you're invited to a forum or a committee to discuss potential requirements and guidelines, people have a tendency, as we are human beings, to go down rabbit holes and to overthink and to think you have to solve all the world's problems in one document. And they can become, believe it or not, to hundreds and hundreds of pages. 80 is actually still quite small, but not for a small SME, of course, for a small business, this is almost impossible to implement. So generally, committees, I try to remind committees, that a document needs to be made for the user, not for the experts, because the user needs to implement it. And that's usually not the expert sitting in the room. It's usually Carl from the street who buys the standard because he wants to make sure, his business has a one-up the other business, right? Because ISO has value. So having being certified, if it's a certifiable standard, which is not for all standards, or saying I self-declare that I follow the standard, that does add value to an organization. A lot of the committees, like Sonia told, like with the huge amount of principles, for instance, forget sometimes it's not digestible and not practicable. So we try to remind them it is better to have a basic document that is implementable by as many countries as possible than trying to save the world with a document that is not digestible. It's a challenge, but you have to repeat that to the committees to make sure they don't
but also
forget.
a bit to also explain that when you want to see ISO, some parts are publicly available. Please look in the platforms, all definitions are available. This is enormous and very valuable. So maybe people don't know and think everything is,
it's called the online browsing platform. All the definitions, all the scopes, the introductions are freely available, but obviously the content and the requirements are not. I get often the question, and I'm sure it's looming here in the room, why they're not free. Nothing is for free. Even if it's freely available on your website, someone pays for it, because the people that develop the standards have to be paid. The people working in the organization have to be paid. So nothing is for free. It's just shifting the cost, right? That's really what's happening. Obviously, any country member body can advertise with their government to subsidize it and make it cheaper. So there are ways, but people have to be paid. No one works for free, and I'm sure no one in this room works for free. So,
and this is a very last question. Now we have to slowly talk at the coffee. No, you can do that.
I mean, we South Africa team, we are battling right now to develop technical guidelines in the e-waste standard. And listening there, also think, oh my God, who's actually ever understanding this? So what really helps, number one, is guideline document, and number two, to really distinguish between different stakeholders, and then extract this. What does it mean for you as a particular stakeholder, and make a nice pictorial that actually shows you exactly which parts are applicable. that really, I think, is really helpful to make it very stakeholder specific. And someone like Aisha has brilliant software that I don't understand, but she actually has managed to put the norms, our norms and standards in one slide, and you can click on little boxes, and then it goes further up, and then it can be even stakeholder specifically filtered, which I really think that is the way ahead.
It's next generation.
Yeah,
Next
yeah. I
generation.
mean, we're talking about this earlier today as well. I mean, obviously standards have to involve, and we go quite off topic here now, what you talk about in terms of circular economy. But yeah, there is a push to digitalize standards. I know I used to work for Standards Australia, and I know they are working very closely with the government there for the building sector to have an application that is usable via the iPad, usable via the phone, where you literally click on a picture of a balcony and it shows you exactly how a balcony should be built, rather than having, you know, like they used to, the printed out version in their back pocket and then standing there and trying to figure out what they're supposed to do. So keep it simple. KISS applies to standards as well as to many other areas where we work with lots of documents, regulations, and information. So, but I can guarantee you, if you ever sit in one of these committee meetings, it's not as simple as it sounds, because finding consensus is a very difficult task, and still trying to keep it simple makes it even harder, because, you know, there's always a big difference between experts from one country to another, and the understanding is different and language is different. And that's why actually terms, principles, and these things are one of the most important standards they develop in the beginning, to make sure we all use the same language. And as mentioned by the lady from JJ, like in trade, you know, it's the most important thing. If you don't speak the same language, it's impossible to actually work together.
Thank you very much, Monia. So a big applause for all the presenters. Thank you very much to the audience for your patience for this dry topic, but I hope that you could have taken some home messages, and please contact the adequate persons for when you need help. So thank you very much. The session is closed.